Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 117 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 29th, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on the experience of Indigenous veterans and Black veterans. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and a reminder that all comments by the members must be addressed to the chair.
I'd like to inform the committee that the joint meeting with PROC and with the delegation of Ukrainian parliamentarians will be held during the second hour of Thursday regular scheduled meeting from noon to 1:30 p.m. Lunch will be served and the meeting will be held in a different room as the committee meeting, both in this building, but we will inform you where it will be.
However, to plan for this meeting, a member must move and have adopted the following motion: that the clerk of the committee take the necessary measures in order to hold an informal joint meeting with the Standing Committee of Procedure and Business of the House, as well as the Ukrainian parliamentary delegation, Thursday, November 28, 2024, and that the committee take in charge the cost tied to this meeting. And I repeat
that the clerk of the committee make the necessary arrangements for an informal meeting, joint meeting with the Standing Committee on Procedures and House Affairs and the delegation of Ukrainian parliamentarians on Thursday, November 28, 2024, and that the committee defray the hospitality expenses related to this meeting. Do I have someone who can propose that motion? Okay, I have Mr. Brian May.
Are there any objections to adopting this motion? I see no objections. This motion is adopted unanimously.
Now I'm going to introduce our witnesses. For the first hour, we have as individual Mr. Bouchard Julix Dorval, veteran, by video conference, but we are trying to get in touch with him. We are not sure, but we're going to try to have Mr. Dorval for the second hour. But here in committee, we have from the Assembly of First Nations Veteran Council, Debbie Hazen, Community Events Manager, Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center, and Alan Knockwood, member. Alors, welcome. And also, last time we had Dr. Lynn Gulliger, sociologist, by video conference, and now it's working. So we have Mrs. Gulliger with us this afternoon. You're going to have 5 minutes each for your opening statement, and after that we will ask you some questions. So I will start on by video conference. Let's start with Dr. Lynn Gulliger. Please open your mic and start your testimony.
Thank you. Tanashi. Hello, bonjour. I'm speaking to you today from the Robinson-Huron Territory, home of the Anishinaabe and Métis peoples. I'm a 16-year veteran, having served in the Canadian Armed Forces between the years of 1976 and 1995. My maternal grandfather served during the Second World War, and my paternal grandfather's brother died in the First World War. I'm an LGBT purge survivor, having served during the most harrowing years for anyone who identified as an LGBT or as a woman. I'm Métis, and my home territory is Treaty 3, located predominantly in northwestern Ontario. It's the only treaty in Canada to which Métis, or the half-breeds as they were known then, were invited to sign. I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario and a member of their Veteran Council. I identify as lesbian, woman, Two-Spirit, Métis, and now as a veteran. The latter is more recent. After leaving the military in 1995, I completed my MA and PhD in sociology. For my bachelor's degree, I studied the military's family resource centers and women. For my master's degree, lesbian military members, and for my PhD, women military members. Following my PhD, I held a Banting Fellowship, and in 2015, I secured a permanent position in academia at Laurentian University. I'm also an O'Brien Fellow. My program of research focuses on marginalization, specifically what marginalized groups experience when they're a member or are associated with an institution, for example, LGBTQIA+, military members and their partners, and the military. With my colleague, Dr. Carmen Poulin, we've collaborated on 2 large Tri-Council funded studies involving the Canadian military and marginalization. The first study was conducted in the late 1990s and early 2000s. We examined the experiences of LGBT service members and their partners regarding the impact of military policy concerning homosexuality, the infamous CFAO 19-20. We interviewed 126 people comprised of 3 groups: those who have been discharged, those who were LGBTs and still serving, and civilian partners of these 2 groups. The second study is in progress. We're examining the experiences of currently serving 2S LGBTQIA+ service members and their partners. We're also conducting another Tri-Council funded study on Métis identity. Personally, my military service has left scars. I have PTSD that is associated with military sexual trauma and years of exposure to a deeply homophobic, anti-LGBT, anti-woman, anti-Indigenous military culture and institution. I lived most of my career in the closet, not being able to openly identify as a lesbian, not wanting to identify as Indigenous, and if I could have, not revealed that I was a woman. I'm very happy and grateful for the advancements both within our military and Veterans Affairs. However, I think we still have more to do. While policies and practices have changed, invisible deep-seated prejudice still exists and the culture needs to shift. I believe that a certain amount of tunnel vision in the histories and stories of these marginalized people that exist. For example, with regard to the LGBT purge, I know from our research that many LGBT military members served undetected for years and are now retired. They, however, carry the trauma of being subjected to that history of purging and the long-enduring culture and institution that embraced homophobia and that was dominated by toxic masculinized heterosexism. Our research done in the 1990s is the only study done pre-LGBT class action settlement time. Except for our study, the study of partners or spouses of the LGBT purge survivors remains unknown, invisible, and unacknowledged. With respect to being a veteran, from the outside, I'm a success story. And yet I walk around with the psychological wounds of having endured the marginalization of being an LGBT member during the purge years, of being a woman who served during those years less than welcoming times. I often wonder whether anyone thinks of the ongoing impact of this has. Does anyone wonder where the perpetrators are? I think about this often when Remembrance Day approaches, or when I seek help from Veterans Affairs, or if I'm going to a Legion, or if I attend a gathering of veterans. I also wonder, what does the VAC and the military know about Métis veterans, Métis experiences, and Métis histories? Have they thought about Louis Riel and how he died at the hands of Canada's military? He died for his people, defending them, their homes, their livelihoods, and yet he was charged with treason and hanged. It's a challenge for me to, on the one hand, to be a proud veteran who served their country, and on the other hand, to hold this knowledge of how the Métis were treated historically. I've yet to reconcile that contradiction. I wonder how much the VAC and the military know or acknowledge that part of Métis history. Thank you for this time and for hearing me. Merci. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gallagher, for your presentation. Now we will turn it over to Ms.
For 5
Debbie
minutes
Eisen.
for your statement. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the Anishinaabe and Algonquin territory. Anibu jo nanatemakus and dejanakas nomeanganawe Anishinaabe kwe Batwana. My name is Debbie Eisen. I am a 36-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. I am originally from Batchewana First Nation in Ontario. I now reside in Nova Scotia, where my Navy career brought me to. My 36-year career took me from 1975 to 2011. I retired on a Friday. I took my sea boots off in 2011 and put moccasins on the Monday. I've been at the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center ever since. Today, I am here as a First Nation veteran and representative of the Assembly of First Nations and First Nations Veterans Council. The First Nations Veterans Council advocates for First Nations veterans, families, and communities and provides a voice to the concerns raised by First Nations veterans who have suffered from the trauma of service or war and its impact on families over generations. First Nations peoples have long history of service in the Canadian Armed Forces, with many veterans returning to their communities after their service. The First Nations Veterans Council recognizes the unique challenges faced by these veterans and has made supporting them a top priority. We come to share the untold stories, the unsung heroism, and the ongoing challenges Indigenous veterans face, specifically First Nation veterans who have served this nation with unwavering dedication and sacrifice. Key priorities of the First Nations Veterans Council include, but are not limited to, advocating for better access to veterans' benefits and services for Indigenous veterans, promoting cultural sensitivity in veteran supports programs, addressing the specific health needs of Indigenous veterans, including mental health supports, preserving and honoring the legacy of Indigenous military service. Key areas of concern raised by the First Nations Veteran Council are as follows: discrimination. Many First Nation veterans were denied benefits, lost their Indian status, and were excluded from memorials and Remembrance Day ceremonies. This shameful treatment is a stain on our nation's history that we must acknowledge and rectify. Supporting Indigenous veterans across diverse nation communities represents unique challenges. Geographic isolation of some communities making access to services difficult. Cultural and linguistic barriers in accessing mainstream veteran services, historical distrust of government institutions among some Indigenous peoples, limited resources in many First Nation communities for veteran support. Challenges faced by female Indigenous veterans, healthcare disparities. Female veterans often struggle to receive gender-specific care within the Veterans Health Administration system, which has historically been male-oriented. Limited access to gynecological and reproductive health services. Inadequate screening and treatment for conditions more common in women. Lack of privacy in some Veterans Affairs facilities not designed with women in mind. Military sexual trauma. Female veterans experience higher rates of military sexual trauma compared to their male counterparts, leading to long-term psychological effects. Higher prevalence of PTSD related to sexual assault or harassment during their service. Difficulty in reporting and seeking help due to fear of retaliation or stigma. Family and caregiver responsibilities. Many female veterans face unique challenges in balancing their post-service lives with family obligations, higher likelihood of being single parents, difficulties in accessing childcare during medical appointments or job training. Indigenous female veterans often face cultural disconnects when seeking support services, lack of culturally competent care in mainstream veteran support systems, difficulty in accessing traditional healing practice within the Veterans Affairs healthcare. Many Indigenous communities are located in remote areas, creating additional barriers to accessing veteran services, limited access to Veterans Affairs facilities and specialized care, challenges in participating in job training programs or educational opportunities. The legacy of historical trauma can impact Indigenous female veterans' willingness to seek help from government institutions. Hesitancy to engage with Veterans Affairs Services due to past negative experiences with government agencies, need for trust-building initiatives and community-based support systems. Addressing the unique needs of female veterans, particularly Indigenous female veterans, and requires targeted approaches and policies by recognizing to address these challenges. AFN's collaboration with Veterans Affairs Canada resulted in the signature of an AFN VAC Letter of Understanding, which focuses on expanding outreach, enhancing First Nations representation in commemoration activities, and establishing a historical record of First Nation veterans. The Letter of Understanding focuses on 4 key pillars: access and expanded outreach activities for First Nation veterans and their families, establish clear points of contact for First Nation veteran matters at VAC, increase Indigenous representation in commemoration-related activities, support the establishment of historical record of First Nation veterans and soldiers who have served in times of war, military conflicts, peace, including those undocumented by Canada. Addressing the unique needs of female veterans, particularly Indigenous female veterans, requires targeted approaches and policies. By recognizing and addressing these specific challenges, we can better support all veterans in their post-service lives. Thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you very much. I know that Mr. Knockwood, you would like to say something too, for the opening statement. Please, go ahead.
My name is Alan Knockwood. I'm also one of the representatives of the Assembly of First Nations Veterans Council, representing Nova Scotia. I will now talk about what the First Nations Veterans Council has been undergoing in the research on homelessness among First Nations veterans, and then we'll talk about Phase 2 of the Letter of Understanding. The Assembly of First Nations has recently undertaken to support the First Nations Veterans Council on investigating homelessness among First Nations veterans in Canada. The research project will allow Assembly of First Nations to identify the distinct ways in which homelessness impacts First Nations veterans, such as compounding impacts of direct and intergenerational trauma caused by the Indian residential school system, the 60s scoop, and PTSD as a result of military service. Anecdotal evidence suggests that there is currently a lack of culturally appropriate support for First Nations veterans, which leads to an increased risk of homelessness and contributes to First Nations overrepresentation in the homeless veterans population.
Excuse me, I think that we have a problem with interpretation, Mr. May?
It was making a weird chiming noise.
Oh, yeah? I know that from English to French we have a problem, but...
Weird chiming noise.
English is fine? No?
French is fine, but English is not.
Oh, it's not working. So, okay, well... It's going to take long? No. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Knockwood, I'm going to suspend 1 minute or two in order to repair this problem. Meeting suspended.
will resume. Thank you very much, and we're going to begin that dialogue right away. I believe that there is an agreement between the parties which will allow Mr. Luc Dusillet, our second vice chair, to briefly make a statement. Mr. Dusillet. Mr. Chair, I thank the colleagues for giving me this brief time to speak. Today, I feel that I'm going to speak to an urgent matter, and I've been thinking about this for 3 days now. One of the objectives of this committee is to work on the services delivered to veterans and to enhance them, if possible, so that we leave these veterans defenseless in Quebec and Canada. However, last Friday, I learned about a situation that is quite worrisome, and I need to speak to it. I can't simply set it aside. We all know that the waiting time for receiving services and benefits is unacceptable, and these timelines have been too long for decades now. We have already working on this for a long time, perhaps for too long, and here at the committee we heard about atrocities committed which shook us up as committee members, and we are all responsible as parliamentarians to intervene. Mr. Chair and esteemed colleagues, you know that the Auditor General clearly indicated last year that the Veterans Affairs Department, and I quote, it does very little to make up for the problems that we've heard about here and for a long time at the committee. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mr. Paul Tenier, former minister, also echoed this by saying that the public service no longer works, the federal apparatus no longer provides the services, that is the reason for its existence. So there's a man in Quebec. He is a veteran, Chief Corporal Michel Marceau. It's his 6th day of a hunger strike. It's the 6th day of a hunger strike for him. And why? It is to alert us and to compel us to act and to force us to respond. This man, who served honorably, today is fighting against a crazy bureaucracy at the department. He is unable to see a family doctor. He's constantly fighting for allowances that do not come in or that come in years after. And he's desperate to find psychological support for himself and his son, more specifically for his son, as he has told us. He is caught in what he calls a modern version of the 12th works of Asterix. So every day of failure to act, in my mind, and no doubt you feel as I do, this is a form of treason vis-à-vis those who have served. Mr. Marceau is only one example, but currently he is reaching the limits of a hunger strike, which of course could be harmful to his health and could in fact threaten his life. Is there an issue? Is there an issue? Yes, I apologize, Mr. Dizili. Apparently, we have 2 persons who are wearing headsets and who are speaking at the same time. There is an echo in the room.
Bon. Écoutez, Monsieur Desilets, bon, et pendant que je parle en français,
and while I'm
Mr. May,
speaking in French,
est-ce qu'il y a
Mr.
toujours
May,
cet écho-là,
are you still
dans
hearing
la
that echo in the
Oh, yeah.
interpretation?
Oh. Bon,
Very well then.
je n'ai donc pas le choix de
I
suspendre
have
encore
no
une fois et
option
de voir
except
avec
to
nos
suspend
techniciens
for
qui
now
vont
and
m'aider
to
à cette
see if we
situation.
can find a
Et
solution to
au
this with our
retour, je vais demander à
technicians.
Monsieur Desilets de
And
conclure.
as we come back, I'd like to ask Mr. Desilets
Yeah.
to conclude.
OK. Vous préférez que Monsieur
Would you
Desilets
prefer
termine pendant 1 minute
for
encore?
Mr. Desilets to continue speaking for a minute?
Moins d'1 minute?
For less than a minute?
Vous êtes d'accord en attendant que les techniciens préparent donc
Do you agree to do
conclusion,
this while
Monsieur
the
Desilets, s'il vous
technicians
plaît.
move ahead with a solution? Mr. Desilets, please,
Oui,
your
regardez,
conclusion.
vous voyez très bien où je veux en venir.
Well,
Quelque
I
part,
think
on a
you
une
understand what I'm getting
responsabilité
at. We
morale,
hold a
sociétale.
moral and
C'est que
societal
une situation comme celle que je
responsibility.
viens de
This kind of
décrire
case
sévit
that I've
peut-être
just
sans qu'on le
described
sache
is perhaps taking
à travers le
place,
Québec, à travers le Canada.
even though we
Celle-là, par
don't know it
contre,
in Canada and
j'en ai
Quebec.
qualité. J'ai été en
However, I
contact
was
avec les
alerted to
vétérans.
this
J'ai eu
case. I
affaire
was in touch with the
un appel
veteran. I have had a
au service
phone
téléphonique
call
pour m'assurer qu'il
at
était
the
en état
911 service to make sure that he was in
de continuer.
a position
Il y a
to
des gens qui sont
continue,
intervenus. Alors, moi,
and
je
some
rappelle
persons
simplement mes
have
collègues
intervened. I'd
à se
simply
rappeler
like to
le pourquoi nous
remind
sommes
our
là.
colleagues
Nos priorités
the
dans
reason
chacune de nos
why we're here and
interventions
what all of our
intérieures, de nos
priorities are.
interventions ici au
And as
comité,
part of
c'est
everything
de ne
that we
pas,
do
de ne
here
pas,
at committee,
je ne dis pas qu'on le
and
fait,
I'm not saying
mais
that
de
we're
ne
not doing
pas
it, but we certainly
laisser ou prendre à la
do
légère des
want to
comportements
trivialize
ceux-là
the
qui peuvent
behaviors
être
of those
Je
who
vous
might be
remercie une
threatened.
Merci.
I'd like to thank you.
Merci,
Thank you very
Monsieur
much for
Desilets,
that. Thank you,
pour votre
Mr. Desilets, for
intervention
your
et
statement.
je comprends aussi votre
I also
contribution,
understand
votre
your
sympathie
contribution
dans des situations
and
comme telles.
your
Donc, collègues,
feelings
nous allons
about this.
donc
Dear colleagues,
reprendre
we're
avec
going to
nos témoins
resume
que nous
with
avons
our
le plaisir
witnesses
d'inviter.
that we were
And we're
fortunate
gonna
to have
start with,
invited.
yeah. Okay.
Echo, I'm sorry.
Sorry. So I'm going to suspend one more time. Sorry. Meeting suspended.
We're going to be
so
resuming
sorry. We didn't
our work.
expect those communication problem, but I'd like to tell you if you have any additional information, even though you've done your opening statement, your opening remarks, you can send it to the clerk when we will take care of that for our report. And members of the committee, for now, I would no.
Il y a 2 voix en français.
Guys, okay, I suspend the meeting. Guys. La séance. Colleague, I was about to tell you that we're going to have only just one round of questions, and I suggest 5 minutes each group because we have another hour with other witnesses. And I'm pleased to invite the first vice president of the committee, Mr. Blake Richards, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And first of all, let me just say to all of the veterans who are with us today, thank you for your service. I would like to just add my voice to what Mr. Desailly had to say as well. We often hear veterans talk about a triple D policy. You know, there are so many delays and denials that it leads veterans into places where hunger strikes become necessary, where they feel like they have to take their personal details to the media, where unfortunately, many veterans end up committing suicide. And then others have even been offered assisted suicide by the department itself. That's disgraceful and shameful, and I'm glad that you raised it, and I want to add my voice to the fact that this is not right and something must be done. Let me turn to you, and I'll leave it to you, Debbie, Allen, whichever you would like to answer on behalf of the FN Veterans Council. I'm sure you're familiar with the program that the Canadian Armed Forces has started called Black Bear Program. Do you think that programs like that, which are helping to bring more Indigenous people into the military, are going to serve to help Indigenous members of our forces have a better experience in our military?
I can answer that question. I am very intimate with the Black Bear program, the Raven program, the Alloy program, and the CFAEP program, because in my time in the military, I was part of a team that brought that program to the Canadian Armed Forces. It is an excellent program for Indigenous people. The problem with those programs is aftercare. When you have, if through those programs, these Indigenous members decide to join the Canadian Armed Forces and they come in, there's a problem with discrimination and racism within the ranks. And I know that the Canadian Armed Forces is working very hard to try to eliminate that. The issues now facing Indigenous people is when they come out of uniform and they have to look for care from a spiritual perspective. Our culture and our way is through spirituality, especially when we have to come through very difficult times. The other one is the pride in who we are as veterans. A lot of time our veterans will not ask for help. It's not just Indigenous veterans, it's all veterans. I myself have been down that road looking for help, and you don't want to, oh my God, I didn't think I was going to do this. Because of the pride, you don't want to ask for the help, but especially if you're Indigenous, our way to helping ourselves is through our spirituality. If that is not offered, it's very difficult to go down that road. The other is our families. You know, our families are a very huge part of who we are in our culture. And when Veterans Affairs is working with an Indigenous veteran, They have to also work with our families through our culture, through our spirituality, and through our ways. If we cannot connect that way, a lot of times our Indigenous veterans will they'll fall between the cracks. So yes, I agree, the Black Bear program, because I opened that program when it first went into Borden. And I have a little bit of guilt from that because it's what happens after those kids go through that program. What happens to them if they decide to join? And I'm telling them a career in the Canadian Armed Forces is a great career. But then when they join and something happens with them and they don't get that care through Veterans Affairs, that's where my not frustration, but that's where I'm focusing my energies on, is to try to make sure that Veterans Affairs understands the spiritual and the cultural aspect of looking after our Indigenous veterans. Miigwech, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And it's like you anticipated the second question I had, which was that second part to that, which is what about the follow-up when they become a veteran, and if you felt that Veterans Affairs was prepared to deal with that. And what I think I've heard very clearly from you is that you don't believe they are at the present moment. You spoke specifically to a couple of things, but one of them you didn't elaborate on a whole lot, and I'll give you that opportunity, which was the family portion of it. And I would actually say this is certainly one that I think is not unique to Indigenous veterans. I think that for all veterans, I think there needs to be more done to making sure that the families are a part of everything. They're a part of the service, so they should be a part of receiving support and care afterwards. And should be a part of the opportunities that are made available to veterans. So you want to speak just a little bit more to what more could be done to support the families, and you know, I've talked different times about even the idea of some of the programs that are made available, educational programs and things like that. Should they not be made available to spouses or family members as well, in cases where maybe the spouse becomes the breadwinner for the family, for example?
Absolutely, and thank you. I think that it's important for families to be involved, Indigenous families to be involved, because back in the time when the treaties were signed, the Indigenous folks signed those treaties to fight for Turtle Island. They didn't have to join the Canadian Forces. They chose to because they looked up to their side of the treaties. So that's leaving their families, leaving their community, leaving their culture behind. So and now if we come forward to nowadays, like Afghanistan, time in Rwanda, you know, those kind of things, when the veteran goes through those programs, if they get a program to help them through the PTSD or to help them through trauma, the families have to be included because the families go through that with the veteran. You know, my husband is a veteran, and when he came back from overseas, the commanding officer sent a letter to say, your husband is coming home. If he all of a sudden flies underneath a coffee table, you know, I knew that because I was military, but a lot of spouses wouldn't have known that. Why is he flying under a coffee table if he hears a loud noise? Or how come he's not, you know, how come he can't sleep in a soft bed? Those kind of things. So when a veteran is going through those kind of things, those kind of care, the families have to be included so that they understand the trauma that the veteran went through.
Yeah. So, Mr. Nock, would you like to conclude with a few words because time is running? Please, Mr. Knockwood.
The cultural component is very important. We're all treaty people, each and every one of us. You signed it, I signed it. My father signed it, my grandfather signed it. My stepfather served with the Royal Canadian Air Force. My biological father served as Merchant Mariners. He wasn't even recognized as a veteran for the longest time. In fact, when he finally was recognized as a veteran, he got his check 10 days after he died. I don't know if he cashed it or not. I took it to where he was. When we come home from service, we are left with a blank slate, absolutely no place to go. It took us years to get the Veterans Administration, Canadian Veterans Administration, to sit at our table and write this MOU. It's a learning curve for them and for us, and how to get things done. But the need for these things to be done is immediate. We're running into situations like he brought up with this poor person in Quebec doing right now. That goes on in all reserves I know of with veterans. We have put these veterans under the wheels for no reason whatsoever. Complete ignorance. That's unfair. It's not right. And I don't care what color the veteran might be. If they're going to be ignored, why do we have a Veterans Administration? The
Wow.
bureaucracy in that administration is so slow. We can improve it. You and I can improve it.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Knockwood.
Thank you so
Et
much,
maintenant, nous allons
Mr.
passer la
Knockwood,
parole
and
au
we will now turn the floor
secrétaire
over
parlementaire,
to our
Monsieur
parliamentary
Randeep
secretary,
Sarai,
Mr.
pour les
Randeep Sarai,
prochaines minutes.
for the next 5 minutes.
Chair,
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you, Mr. Knockwood and Ms. Essen. Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Knockwood. What does recognition of Indigenous veterans mean to you personally, and how can it be done in a meaningful way that respects both the service and your culture?
Well, we have to recognize the fact that I, as a Mi'kmaq, Mi'kmaq person, were one of the first peoples in North America that had to deal with colonial peoples. Our treaties are all peace and friendship treaties from the very beginning. And we still live by these treaties as alive and well. These documents didn't die in 1762, 1763, or whatever. These documents are alive and well right now. We have a big war going on in the south shore of Nova Scotia with the fishermen over the rights of allowing us to fish, which is ironic because we taught them how to fish. Ouch. When a veteran comes home, when a veteran signs up with the Canadian Armed Forces or even the American Armed Forces, we do that because of a treaty obligation. And we stand by that treaty obligation because it is alive and well. But what we're asking for as a veteran is to make sure that that living arrangement carries through to when I'm finished my agreement. It hasn't yet. And a lot of us are out there in the cold. Not just natives, but all veterans are out there in the cold.
Maybe if you can also give me kind of, if you have advice to younger Indigenous individuals who may be considering a career in the military, what advice would you give?
I'll have mixed feelings on both sides of that. I'm looking at a change in the United States right now with a idiot that's coming into power that is siding with Putin in Russia. We have a very volatile situation happening. Do I want to send my son, my daughter, into what possibly might be nuclear war? Not really. But those are the realities we have to live with right now. We are living in Canada, and supposedly in a safe place. I'm sorry, we're living right next to the elephant down there. And the elephant's going to roll over any moment now. So I would right now discourage them from joining the armed forces. Right now. Because the certainty of death is too real. I've already seen it in Vietnam. It's very hard for me to send someone over to something that's like that.
And maybe Ms. Eisen, if you can elaborate on that, what advice would you have for?
Agree wholeheartedly, one side of me, with what Alan has said. However, if I was talking to a young person that wanted to join the Canadian Armed Forces, what I would tell them to do is stay true to your roots. Stay true to who you are as an Indigenous person. Never let that go, because if you do, then you lose a part of yourself of who we are. And you have to stay true to where what our ancestors fought for us to be here today. I used to be, in one of my jobs, was an Indigenous Aboriginal recruiting advisor for the Canadian Armed Forces. And I wholeheartedly stood behind recruiting young Indigenous people into the Canadian Armed Forces. But now my tune is changing a little, because I have a granddaughter who is looking to join, and I honestly don't know what to say to her, to encourage her, or to, because of everything that's happening with all of the stuff that's going on with what Alan has said. But I don't want her to lose. Ever since she was a baby, I've brought her up with her culture, with the knowledge of her teachings, with the strength that a woman should have as who she is. And I'll never tell her no, but as a grandmother, I will be doubly afraid if she does join up. Thank you.
Just briefly, I've got a few seconds left. On that, are you saying more as an Indigenous mother or as a mother in general? Like, I just want to know, is it
I say both, because in our families, the grandmother is the one who gives the teachings in our culture. I've spent more time with my grandchildren than I have with my granddaughters. I spent 36 years in the military, so you have to do what you got to do. But the time that I've spent with my grandchildren, I'm closer with my grandchildren for the very reason that our culture says the grandmother and the grandfather teach their grandchildren the culture, the teachings, the way of our people. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarai. Et je voudrais rappeler aux députés que
I'd like to remind our members that we have Dr. Gwiniker, who's also with us, Guliker rather. For the next few minutes, I'd like to ask Mr. Luc Désilets to take the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madame Echen, d'après vous, là, est-ce
So,
que les
Ms.
vétérans et
Eisen,
vétéranes autochtones ont
do
les
you
mêmes
believe
services
that
que les
Indigenous
vétérans
veterans
vétérans?
receive the same services as non-Indigenous veterans?
No, I don't. And I say this not lightly, because a lot of times, and I work at the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center. I've been there since December of 2011, and every day I see veterans come in that door, and I connect with them, and they can't get a hold sometimes, or too nervous to. I try to get them to go to Veterans Affairs for services. A lot of them don't want to go into government agencies because of the way that they have been treated in the Canadian Armed Forces. They the way that they need to be treated, especially for post-traumatic stress disorder, or the way that they've been treated in the military and don't know how to get the help. They need to be treated from a cultural way, from a cultural perspective. You cannot treat them the same way that you treat other veterans, and no disrespect to other veterans, but way we brought up is through sharing circles, through sweat lodges. That's what helped me from my trauma when I came back from Rwanda, was through sweat lodges and through talking with my elders. That's what helped me through very difficult times. I can't say whether just going through talking to a psychologist would have helped, but I don't think they get the same treatment, and people need to look at it from a different perspective with Indigenous folks. Thank you. Miigwech.
Je pense, Monsieur Norwood, vous avez le goût d'ajouter quelque chose.
So, Mr. Knockwood, I imagine you'd like to add something?
When you look at the veterans' homes across Canada, I mean, really look at them and walk through them, walk through those walls. walk down those halls. How many Native veterans do you see in there? None. Why? Because more often than not, they're turned down. They're turned away. They're not good enough. They don't have enough money for it. They don't have this. They don't have that. They have a whole multitude of reasons as to not being obligated or to fulfill an obligation that they are entitled to. I went to Normandy for the 80th anniversary, and there were 3 Native people, myself, a Native man from Ontario, and a Métis man. We had to hold up ceremony for a lot of the people because it was culturally inappropriate for the most part. And we added that Native component, Native spirituality to the program. And I had the Brigadier General Robert back after a session at the Abbey. And he came to me when I sang the honor song there. He said, "Thank you. You made my trip worthwhile." That's the part that people fail to see, that we are a viable part of the fabric of veterans. But we're excluded. If we are added to that fabric, we make that fabric whole. And that's all we ask. Be included in that thing. Cultural appropriation, culturally, our culture only thing can do is nurture what's out there. Give us a chance to give that gift. And it is a gift that we are willing to give. Merci.
Non, merci à vous.
Thank you to you.
Est-ce que vous voyez l'un de vous des pistes
Either
de
of you,
solutions
do you see any
pour pouvoir
possible
rapprocher,
solutions
les deux
in order
communautés et
to
offrir les
bring
mêmes
together
services
both
que
communities and to deliver the same services and to provide adequate solutions? Do you see any possible solutions?
Okay. From my perspective, I have been talking a long time whenever I can use my voice to reach Indigenous veterans, especially from the urban context, setting up offices or part-time, once a month, whatever, at Mi'kmaq or at the friendship centers across Canada. There's 126 friendship centers across Canada. Veterans go to the urban environment. Where they're going to go for help is through those friendship centers. So there's one aspect of it. The other one is for those Indigenous veterans who are in remote areas. Access to those services from a remote area is very difficult, especially if they're homeless. The other thing is to for Veterans Affairs to look at and maybe consider treatment from a spirituality aspect for us, for veterans, sweat lodges, having access to elders to be able to talk to elders to get them through trauma, through times like that, being back in community and working through those spirituality aspects.
We have to. Wouldn't it be nice to have an Indian or a Native person actually working at VA? Period. But I would get a lot done.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
you can do what you know. En anglais, en français. El nuicto.
Thank you very much. And now, by video conference, we have our colleague Rachel Blenny for 5 minutes, please. Ms. Blenny, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank all of our witnesses, and a special thank you to those of you who have served, and a very big warm hello to Mr. Knockwood. I really enjoyed our time in Normandy when we were there for recognizing D-Day, and I'm really happy to see you again here in this role. So my first question is for Miss Izan. I was really compelled by your testimony, and one of the things that I was really moved by was you spoke about female Indigenous veterans and how those specific needs seem to be left out and not honored. And I'm just wondering if you could expand on what that looks like and what knowledge you have on that so that the committee can better understand, and also what solutions you think might be helpful.
When I speak about female and Indigenous veterans, the way that we do our ceremonies, the way that we culturally do things is a little bit different. Like when we're in sweat lodge ceremonies, female veterans, females period, do not go into the sweat lodge, because when we're on our moon time, we're considered to be very powerful. So we don't take part in ceremonies. We don't take part in smudging ceremonies. And it's the teachings that these women, these Indigenous women veterans, need to get from female elders in order to bring them. The teachings are very different than what the male elders would give to the women. So in order for female Indigenous veterans to have access to culturally appropriate and spiritual moving ahead, they need to have that ability to have one-on-one with an elder from their community. So if for me, if I'm posted, well, I live in Halifax now, but I'm from Anishinaabe territory by Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. If I was having a difficulty and I needed to speak to an elder, I need to speak to an Anishinaabe elder, female elder. I can't do that in Mi'kmaq territory, even though I respect the territory. I need to go back to my own territory to speak to Anishinaabe women elders. So the way that our teachings come is very different, and I think that this is not an easy path to go down. What we're saying to you, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of understanding. It's going to take a lot of self-reflection on how Veterans Affairs normally does things. And it's looking from a two-eyed seeing approach, you know, from the Western eye of the way that you normally would work with veterans, but then from the Indigenous eye on how Indigenous people would work through issues and through problems. And Elder Albert Marshall from the Mi'kmaq Eskasoni was the one who talked about the two-eyed seeing approach, and it's something that I've worked with my whole career on being able to move forward with that. So from a woman's perspective, it's the teachings that we have to go with from the woman's perspective, and that's why it's so different. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you for that. And I guess I'm going to combine two questions in one and then have you answer, Debbie, and then Alan after, if that's okay. The first part is just, you talked a lot about the spiritual supports that are needed, and of course that it must come from an elder. And I'm just wondering, is there any capacity for VAC to pay honorariums to these amazing elders that are helping with the healing, or are they even acknowledged in that role? And then the second part is, you talked about the distrust of government agencies, which I believe has a special nuance for Indigenous people that the rest of the population may not have that same. So when we talk about culturally appropriate training so people can address that from VAC, do you think that's something that would help them deliver better services to Indigenous veterans?
I can only answer the second part of that question, in that culturally appropriate has to be geographically appropriate as well. We can't have a blanket policy that goes across Canada, because Tlingit and Mi'kmaq, two separate nations and two ways of thinking, which is good. We have to have someone in those facilities from that culture. and we have none now. When a person comes back with PTSD, for one example, the first thing they do is they assign them a psychiatrist. Well, a poor psychiatrist doesn't know diddly squat about who I am and what I am or why I am as a Native person. So whatever, quote, treatment I'm getting is already beginning to be culturally inappropriate. But if I go to a sweat lodge and get the healing from that, that works. When I came back from Vietnam, I did not go to a psychiatrist because it was like talking to that wall. And it just bounced off. I had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. I went to a spiritualist, and I went through a ceremony in the Navajo tradition for starts. Then I went to the Nigamaw tradition with the late David Geo. I can honestly say I don't have PTSD anymore. Because it was a culturally appropriate treatment for it the entire time. Let's start there. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thank you very much, Ms. Bliney. Thank you. And we're going to stop right here. But I'm curious, Ms. Eisen, I'd like to know, I know that you're proud to wear your medals, but you have one of the right side. Can you tell us why?
The what?
Medal.
This one?
Yeah.
This is the Aboriginal Veterans Medallion. This is part of the work that we have done in the Canadian Armed Forces when I was still in uniform to allow Indigenous Canadian Armed Forces members to wear this medallion when we went to Indigenous events. Same way that we got the braid instituted, same way that the Métis can wear a sash when they're in uniform. So that's what this is. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you. And I'd like to thank all of you and say thank you to Dr. Lynn Gulliger, sociologist, Métis veteran. And we have from the Assembly of First Nation Veteran Council, Debbie Eisen, gestionnaire des événements communautaires Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center, et Monsieur Alan Knockwood, member.
And we have Mr. Alan Knockwood as well. On that note, we are going to briefly suspend to give us enough time to welcome our witnesses for the next hour.
Okay, now we resume our meeting. And for that second part of the committee today, we have with us from Nigihane Center as a witness, Mr. William Shade, Board of Directors Chairperson by video conference. Welcome. And from the Vimy Foundation, we have Kathleen Bailey, Executive Director by video conference. You're going to have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And let's say congratulations also to Vimy Foundation. I know that they opened their la Maison Forgette dernièrement, donc félicitations.
And
I'm
recently, so
going to start with
congratulations.
you, Mrs. Bailey, Kathleen Bailey. So you have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and after that, we'll ask you some questions. Please open your mic. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Oui,
Thank you very
we did
much,
in fact
Mr.
open
Chair.
our new office space last week, and we were very happy to have some members of the committee coming to visit beforehand. Donc, merci pour cette commentaire. C'est
Thank
vraiment
you
gentil.
for your comments. That's very kind.
So good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to present to the Standing Committee. Bonjour et merci pour l'invitation à
Good
assister au comité.
afternoon, and thank you very much for the
My name is
invitation to
Caitlin
present to
Bailey,
the
and I'm
committee.
here today representing the Vimy Foundation, a First World War commemoration and education organization that has worked with the Department of Veterans Affairs since 2010. Notre mission en matière d'éducation des jeunes et du public
Our
implique
mission
l'organisation
is to
d'importants
educate
programmes
young
nationaux
people and the general
racontant
public
l'histoire des
regarding the
Canadiens et Canadiennes
important
qui ont vécu
national
la Première Guerre
programs that
mondiale
tell the
de
history of
1914
Canadians
à
who
1918.
experienced the First World
These
War from
programs
1914
reach
1918.
hundreds of thousands of Canadians each year. As part of our work, we engage with many equity-seeking communities, and we have committed to weaving the experiences of Indigenous and Black veterans during the First World War throughout our programming, focusing on their service during the conflict and highlighting the particular difficulties they faced receiving recognition for the same. In a recent National Educator Survey that we performed in the fall of 2024, 50% of our responding educators noted that they already teach Black and Indigenous experiences of the First World War, but that they lacked sufficient digital educational resources for their teaching. En outre, nos enquêtes internes
As
auprès
well
des
as
jeunes
internal surveys with young people reveal an additional desire to know more about these communities and their experiences during World War
Organizations
I.
like ours and the many others who have presented during this committee study serve to help address these identified gaps. Our suite of digital projects leading up to the Vimy 110 anniversary in 2027 will reach hundreds of thousands of Canadians and will highlight stories of many First World War veterans, including those of Black and Indigenous veterans. However, they require investment to help us meet the needs of the educators and the publics that we serve. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention. I'm
Thank you
looking
very
forward
much for
to
your
answering
attention.
questions. Je me mets à votre disposition pour
I'm
répondre à
looking
vos
forward
éventuelles
to answering your
questions.
questions.
Merci encore.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Bailey, pour votre
Thank you very much,
introduction.
Ms. Bailey, for
Et
your
sur
presentation.
I'm
And
gonna
on that
invite
note,
Mr. Shade from the Board of Nigihane Center for your opening remarks. Please go ahead. Microphone, please. That will be better.
Pretty good.
Okay,
isn't it?
thank you.
You need a microphone to talk at this committee. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to appear at this meeting of the committee. As the chair said, I am Bill Shedd. I'm an 85-year-old Cree member of the Peguis First Nation, a Navy veteran, and currently chair of Nigihane Center, where Indigenous people are helped in their transition to urban life. This is a rather unique approach that I'm going to be talking about, and it doesn't deal directly with service to veterans, but I think it's a model that perhaps those who are involved in delivering service to veterans, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, might learn from. Well, as migration of Indigenous people into urban centers increased, governments rolled out programs and funding to NGOs, that's non-governmental organizations or charities, not-for-profits, to help Indigenous people adjust to urban life. Most programs addressed transition issues in an ad hoc silo fashion. NGOs operated independently from one another, yet on associated issues affecting transition. Different government agencies would fund different NGOs to operate programs for each issue, such as literacy, training, etc. Complicating matters further, funding for rental space for program delivery was often inadequate. NGOs were limited to renting space as is, where is, and the spaces were unrenovated, not suitable for service, and in difficult to access sites. Working together, several NGOs in Winnipeg resolved to improve workspace and service delivery shortcomings. They incorporated as the Aboriginal Centre of Winnipeg, Inc., and in 1990, that's when they incorporated, but in 1992, they purchased Winnipeg's historic CP Railroad Station. I have been associated with the Niiganan Centre since the beginning of 1993, initially as CEO responsible for the restoration and renovation of the station into a one-stop service center. On completion, the 120-year-old building emerged as an operational service center that the people that first incorporated as the Aboriginal Centre of Winnipeg envisioned. At Niiganan Centre, Indigenous people receive a variety of education, training, and support service to help them improve their life opportunities. Two major NGOs operate out of the centre, and I'll talk about each of them. Niiganan Education, Training, and Employment Services provide education, training, student support services, and employment opportunities. They operate the Aboriginal Community Campus, Niiganan College of Applied Technology, Cookhams Place Daycare, Niiganan Village, a student housing complex, and the Aboriginal Aerospace Initiative and Technical Training Center. The Aboriginal Health and Wellness Center is a community-based health and wellness resource agency. Programs and services offered include primary care clinic, community outreach and education, health promotion, and prevention, with services of physicians, nurses, community health workers, and traditional healers. Abenochi Miaowen is a children's health Head Start program, and they also operate a fetal alcohol syndrome and effects prevention program. In the late 1990s, Aboriginal veterans argued for more public recognition. This led to the mayor of the city of Winnipeg declaring Aboriginal Veterans Day for the city in 1993. In 1994, the Niiganan Centre staff and students put on the first Aboriginal Veterans Day service in the rotunda of Niiganan Centre. That program, or that service, has continued ever since, with the exception of the COVID years. There is one other program I wanted to speak very briefly about. I'm a member of the board of directors of Inspire. Inspire is a charity that raises money for education, post-secondary education for Indigenous students. This program started when the former name for Inspire was the Canadian Native Arts Foundation. They took responsibility for the stewardship of the National Aboriginal Veteran Scholarships Fund, initiated by the Government of Canada on a recommendation of the Senate Committee on Indigenous Veterans, chaired by the late Senator Len Marchand. The $1.1 million fund has stimulated a fantastic growth in the work of Inspire. They are now funding, through scholarships and bursaries, students, Indigenous students, providing, pursuing careers in post-secondary education and training. Since 1996, Inspired has distributed $270 million in scholarships and bursaries to some 74,000 students. This year alone, we will have distributed $32 million to 8,400 students. These two programs, Inspired and Niiganan, were really the initiative of Indigenous leaders who took a very great chance. Niiganan purchased a building, a 120,000 square foot building, with an idea of turning it into a better place to deliver services in a coordinated fashion. They succeeded. Inspired, stimulated by the requirement to have responsibility for a fund that had to be used to deliver scholarships and bursaries beyond their initial scope of arts, now have succeeded in what I think is beyond their wildest dreams, to deliver so many scholarships to so many students in the past 20-some years. My association with two of these organizations is indicative of the veterans that have been involved in the work of all of these efforts to improve life for Indigenous people generally returning to the city. The fact that Niiganan Center alone has successfully proven that you can be successful delivering services in a coordinated one-stop service center, perhaps is something that the Department of Veterans Affairs could look at, and others who want to help veterans who are returning to life in their home communities.
Thank you, Mr. Shedd, for your opening remarks. And you know, because of technical problem, we start
late. I understand.
And some of our colleagues cannot stay longer than 5:30, so I will give 4 minutes each groups to ask our witnesses questions. And I invite, first of all, Mrs. Wagenthal for 4 minutes, please. Mrs. Wagenthal.
Mr. Shedd, thank you so much for all that you have done. Clearly, you have invested in ways that encourage and inspire other people to also assist with what you have accomplished here. I have one question for you. We have talked often at this committee about one-stop shops over the years, and what you have is an exemplary model. Why do you think that Veterans Affairs needs to recreate it? Why would we not say Veterans Affairs provide the funding to veterans that they need and allow them to go to places like this? We know veterans serving veterans, veterans helping veterans is the best way to see them succeed, because those are the people that understand the best. So do you see this model that you have serving the needs of Indigenous veterans? I can't hear you, sorry.
Yes, microphone, please.
I really don't want to be critical of the public servants in departments like the Department of Veterans Affairs, who have a client base, a worthy client base that needs service. However, I think that if you look at some of the NGOs that are out there, and I'll just use that general term NGO to represent any not-for-profit organization or charity that's doing work to deliver service, they sometimes can do the job in a more expeditious way because they can call on other resources outside of, say, what the government has available. For example, when we were doing the Aboriginal Center conversion, the railroad station conversion, we used, I would think, something like 25 different contribution agreements from maybe a dozen federal departments and provincial departments.
Sir, I'm sorry.
That's it.
Sir, Mr. I hate that I only have 4 minutes.
Okay.
I appreciate that. If you could even send us some notes on your perspectives. I'm not in any way trying to belittle Veterans Affairs. It's a question of what their role should be and what would be most efficient.
I was going to say that I think there is an efficiency in funding the veteran so that he can access or he or she can
Correct.
access service from an NGO. Could be the Legion,
Wonderful.
for example.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Ms. Bailey, just very quickly, I'm sorry I don't have more time. You had talked about, I understand, a digital project that you were working on and working towards VIMI 110 years coming up. I know that you need to plan. What do you see as some of the maybe roadblocks or barriers to you being able to do everything that you would like to do to prepare in advance to make that event as amazing as it should be?
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, we do need time to prepare, and for us, one of the major roadblocks certainly is funding. I will not beat around the bush. Our ability to deliver projects to their full size depends on the funding. We have 50% of what we need for these digital projects raised, and the projects are going forward, but the scale of the projects and how they're rolled out will be dependent on funding. Timelines for us is 2 years.
Oh, thank you. So that's what I wanted to ask. So the timeline that you need this funding to know that it's there and available so that you can continue on, how much time do you need in advance?
Probably 18 months to 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Mrs. Wagenthal, 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Question.
Sure. Ms. Bailey, I had the opportunity to go to Vimy Ridge, and we are talking about our Indigenous veterans. Can you, in a nutshell, just describe why we were successful at Vimy Ridge in relation to the role that our Indigenous veterans played with the Rolling Barrage?
Vimy Ridge was a success because it was very well organized. And part of that organization was scouting and maps and sniping and really being able to bring together all of the services to do what everyone did best, I suppose I would say. During the First World War, there were 4,000 identified Indigenous veterans. There are probably many more who were involved in those battalions. Frequently, they did serve positions as snipers and scouts, and they would have been extremely important in the success of the Battle of Vimy Ridge in 1917.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I invite Mr. Wilson Miao. She is by video conference. So, Mr. Miao, you have 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witness for joining us today on this very important study. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to direct my first question to Ms. Bailey. What step has the Vimy Ridge Foundation has taken to research and preserve and highlight the stories of Black and Indigenous veterans who served in uniform, and how can Canadians learn more about these veterans' experience?
Absolutely. So our work is underpinned by the TRC and the calls for the TRC. So that runs throughout our public education programs and our youth education programs. We've done significant research on both topics, as well as other groups involved in the First World War, women, for example, francophones outside of Quebec. And all of these are topics that we've spent a deep amount of time researching and ensuring that they are included in all of our curriculum. So if you are using a curriculum in our school, if you're accessing one of our programs, those stories and those viewpoints are very clearly shown, and they're very clearly illustrated to Canadians as part of the full context of the First World War. All of these are available through our website, and the educators access them through multiple different points and different programs that we run.
And could you share with us more details on how Vimy Foundation supports and engages with Indigenous communities to honor and preserve the legacy of Indigenous veterans?
Yes, absolutely. We spend a lot of time communicating directly with different Indigenous communities. We focus particularly on schools that have large populations of reserve students. Many of those relationships are one-on-one relationships, as the previous panels mentioned. Indigenous communities in Canada are not a single block, and we approach each of those communities separately based on the needs and expressed desires of that community for our services.
Thank you. And now I'd like to go to Mr. Shed. Really thank you for your service. And I understand you're considered one of the founder for the National Indigenous Veterans Day in Canada, which took place 30 years ago. And how would you say that Indigenous Veterans Day has evolved over these past 3 decades?
Wow. Well, first of all, I really don't consider myself a founder. I certainly was there for the first service, and I had responsibility for overseeing whatever was happening in Niguinand Center. And I really helped the staff and students put on that thing. But everything that was done on that first service was done by staff and students with a little bit of consultation, not just from me, but from local veterans, Indigenous veterans. Mm-hmm. I don't know what other communities are doing, but certainly the service that we hold in Winnipeg at the Niguinand Center is quite moving. We do it in the rotunda, which is probably about, well, we can put 300, 400, 500 people seated, well, no, 400, I guess, seated on the rotunda floor. This is the old waiting room area of the train station. So that's filled every service that we have. And it's well supported, not just by the Indigenous veterans, but also the non-Indigenous veterans and the local military militias, reserve forces and what have you, also send representatives, as do the governments. We also get support from Veterans Affairs. Now, if that is being repeated elsewhere in other big cities, boy, that's really good. That's really something. But Winnipeg is a pretty unusual city because I think our population is about 25%. Indigenous population in the city of Winnipeg is about 25% of the city's population now.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have any suggestion on how we can better recognize Indigenous Veterans Day, not just in Winnipeg, but across Canada?
I don't know, it has
Mr.
to.
Shed, we only have 15 seconds. Thank you very much. And it's only 4 minutes. So maintenant, je vais donc passer la parole.
I would now like to turn the floor over to Mr. Luc Desilets and to welcome Mr. Marius Simard as well. Mr. Desilets, you have 4 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Bonjour. Ça fait plaisir de
Ms. Bailey, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to see you. I had the opportunity of visiting your foundation at Sherbrooke Street 2 weeks ago. It's really an extraordinary facility you have. It's impressive. You have maps of World War I, really floored me. My question is this. Have you had news from Veterans Affairs? Any veterans? I know that you still require funding. Only 50% of your budget is in. Have you had any news from Veterans Affairs? Not for the time being. We're still waiting for the budget process on the federal level to be completed. We are also working on a commemorative program, and in fact, this organization is giving us money. But as well, this has been underway for 6 months, and we have to do that for each budget. It's not an overall envelope, it's always an envelope for every project that we receive. My next question. The Vimy Foundation helps Black, Métis, and Indigenous veterans, and how does it do this? It's all about education for us. We're not a veterans service, we're an educational service, and that's part of our idea that Canadians benefit from this knowledge as to Indigenous and Black veterans. And we want to say that we want to be recognized for the service. That is what they're saying. They also want to be recognized for their knowledge. So our service
ce savoir national, je veux dire.
Is part of retaining that national service, that knowledge. So if people don't know about this, we will not be able to move on to the next steps in order to really have an overall idea of the different experiences of the different veterans, that is Indigenous and Black veterans. So are you seeing any hindrances in trying to share this knowledge? Yes, of course. My colleague already spoke to research. And the stories about World War I are to a large extent unknown. To a certain extent, they've been set aside. So what we do is that research is at the basis of everything we do. But is to conduct research means money and times. So it's really an issue of resources, both human, monetary resources, etc., to find these stories and to shed light on these stories as well. Again, regarding Black and Métis veterans, who are your main partners that assist you in addressing this part of history? Well, this comes from the actual groups. These are stories that are passed down from members of the family. Often these stories are oral histories. We work a great deal with the communities in order to speak about the histories and to tell the stories, and also to find a means of sharing these on a community basis. We're not there to take a history and simply showcase them and then forget about the community. It's an integral part of it, and it takes time to build those relationships. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Bailey. And in order to conclude this meeting, I would like to ask Ms. Richard Blaney to take the floor for 4 minutes. Ms. Blaney, you have the floor by video conference.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank our witnesses for being here. Ms. Bailey, you got asked everything already that I wanted to ask you, but I know I've spent a couple of times and met you, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing in terms of educating so many people about Canada's sacrifice and about the nuances in terms of the communities that we have. So, Mr. Sheed, if I could come to you, I was really moved by your presentation and also reading a bit about you, sir. You've done a lot of really amazing things, and I appreciate that. So my question for you is we heard from the testimony from the last witnesses around the culturally appropriate and spiritual supports that are often required by Indigenous people when they return from service. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about your knowledge about that, and if you could talk about your organization and if you provide any of those services.
When you're in a local situation like Niiganan Center, it's relatively easy to provide the cultural services because your focus is narrower. But if you're in an organization like the Canadian Forces or some group that does national service, it becomes very difficult to be culturally sensitive across the country. I mean, there's so many differences in languages, in our traditions and cultures, and it is a challenge. So my only suggestion is that if you make an honest effort to do something, even if it's as simple as smudging or asking somebody to offer a prayer to open a session of a meeting or whatever the case may be, that to me would be welcome by anybody because it's seen as an honest effort. Now, I know that 70 years ago, gosh, it's been that long, that it was very difficult for a group of us to come together with a single idea of how to show a group of English people how we are, how we are could be identified singly as an Indian, for example. We were from a different different groups from across the country. The only thing that we can decide on is perhaps all we can do is be the John Wayne Indian and join them in a little bit of a laugh. But that's not appropriate anymore. You can't do that. You have to make an effort to be sensitive to the spirituality and the cultures generally, and they all come back to being respectful. Just be respectful to an individual. Treat the individual like an individual, and try to extend a true hand of friendship. And from that, I think that you can make the start of trying to get an understanding of how the individual has been affected by what has happened, and maybe you can then buy him a beer if that's the case. I don't know.
That's an excellent answer. I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate the nuance of the local reality versus a national reality, and how do we make those two work together. And the chair's giving me a timeout. So thank you so much for answering my questions.
I think he's going to drop the guillotine on the whole lot of us.
Thank you, Ms. Bliney. And we have to stop here. And on behalf of members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for your contributions. And chers collègues, nous avions avec nous from Niginan Centre,
Dear
Monsieur
colleagues,
William
we
Shedd,
had
qui
with
est
us Mr. William
président
Shedd
du
from the
conseil
Nigan
d'administration
Center, who is
et de
board
la
of the
Fondation Vimy,
Board of
Madame
Directors, and from the
Kathleen
Vimy
Bailey,
Foundation, we welcome Ms.
directrice
Caitlin Bailey,
exécutive.
Executive
Encore une
Director.
fois,
So
merci
once again,
pour votre
thank you very
participation.
much for
Et
your
je demande aux
attendance.
collègues,
And I would
plaît-il aux
like to
membres du
ask my
comité
colleagues and the
d'adjourner la
members for the meeting
Bien,
for a motion to
La
adjourn the
rencontre est
meeting.
adjournée.
The meeting
Merci.
stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Au revoir.